from the bottom of some. Amar Rav Acha Breda. No, I guess we have to stop from Amar Rav Nachman. Okay, for Amar Rav Nachman, Sama Kimel base about 5 lines from the bottom or 6. For Amar Rav Nachman, Haiman the Oza Pshita Mechavre. If Ruvain borrows money from Shimon, he borrows $100. For Ashkak Bey Tufaina, but he discovers that instead of $100, he got $105 from the lender, $103. If it seems like it was likely an error that the Shimon gave Ruvain more than he intended to, so then Ruvain has to return the money. But if it is not a typical mistake, but it would seem that it would have had to have been calculated that this extra amount was given. So then Shimon can assume that Ruvain gave him a matana. What would be a reasonable assumption that it was just a mistake? Some of Rav Yosef that it used to be that they would count in multiples of a 5 or 10. So a person may have just gotten the wrong multiple. So therefore, instead of Shimon giving Ruvain $100, so he mistakenly gave him $105. He gave an extra. He was counting $5 bills, or he gave him an extra $10 bill, $110. So that would be a reasonable error, and therefore, under those circumstances, Ruvain would have to return the extra amount to Shimon because it was clearly given to him in error. But if it was just like $1 or $2 extra, so those would have been very carefully counted out, and it doesn't make sense that Ruvain would have given an extra dollar or $2, so it's like $103 as opposed to $105. So then Shimon can assume that Ruvain was giving him a gift. Tosfos points out that nowadays we always assume that it was a mistake. So Amalei Rav Acha Brei Rav Ashi the Inish Takipahu, and if Shimon is the sort of guy who's a very strong-armed individual who doesn't normally give out gifts, he's not that personality. So Yair Matana, and now Ruben discovers there's an extra dollar or two that's in there, and it seems like it was very deliberately put in there. So, how do you construe that situation? It can't be that Shimon was giving him a gift, and yet it doesn't seem like it was a mistake either. So Amalei, Rav Ashi responded, Tilma Migzo Gazle. No, he's a strong-armed individual, which means that he may have stolen, and now he wants to return the amount that he previously stole. So even though Shimon is not wanted to give gifts, he is wanted to return the money that he stole, and that's the reason why he's throwing in a little bit extra. The Tanya, as the Brisa says, Hagozel es chavero that if, let's say, Reuven stole money from Shimon, and now he buys something from Shimon and has to give him some money, and he gives him a little bit extra, so he fulfilled his obligation of thank you very much, in a way that is less embarrassing. But let's say that a person who's loaning money, Shimon is loaning money to Reuven, and Reuven doesn't know Shimon from Adam. Shimon just came from China. And he never had any dealings with him before. So it's impossible that Shimon would have stolen money from Reuven. He never had any business dealings before. He couldn't have stolen from him. And he's also a strong-armed individual who doesn't give gifts. And now Reuven discovers there's an extra dollar or two that got slipped in. So how does he understand this? Does he have to return it in that case, or say no? Amalei, as explained Rav Ashi, it could be that somebody else who Ruvain is accustomed to dealing with stole money from Ruvain, and that person was sort of embarrassed, is trying to figure out how to return the money. So he said, "Oh, Shimon, you're loaning money to Ruvain anyway, so here's an extra $2 or $3 if you can throw that into the mix, and this way I'll be able to return the stolen money to Ruvain." When Ruvain is borrowing money from you, just kind of have this money swallowed up together with the other money, and this way I'll be able to return the stolen money to Ruvain. So therefore, in that case as well, Ruvain is allowed to keep the money. So Amarav Kaha, which means that when he returns the money to Shimon, since Shimon technically only loaned him 100,000, he only has to pay back 100,000, not 103,000. So Amarav Kana Havi Yasivna Bishili Pirke Darav. He said that I came towards the very end of Rav's drasha, or Rav's drasha, and I wasn't there at the beginning. I woke up late. I figured that the ending is the most important part anyway. Mishamis the Kama Kari Kari. And then at the end of his drasha, I heard that he kept on talking about pumpkins, Kari Kari, and I had no idea why he keeps on talking about pumpkins. Lo Yadana my Kama, since I missed the beginning of the drasha, I didn't really know why he kept on talking about pumpkins. So Basar the Kama Ami Lahu, my Kari to Kama Rav. So after Rav finished with his drasha, he said to the other people who were listening to the drasha, what's this business about the pumpkins that Rav was waxing poetic about? So Amulei Hachi Kama Rav. So they said to me, this is what Rav had, or Rav said in his drasha about pumpkins. Ayman Diyoy Zuzah the Gina Akari, that if somebody gives money to a gardener who owns a pumpkin patch, and he gives money for for pumpkins that are still like only gourds. They're in the early stage of their development. Kazli Asara Akari B'nei Zarta, and now they're just little gourds that are a half an amma each. 10 of them are a half an amma each. The Amalei and the purchaser gives money to the gardener of the pumpkin patch, and he says that Allah, at this point in time, they're only a zuz. So Amalei Yehivn Allah B'nei Gamida, that he says, I want you to give me the pumpkins. I'm going to pay you the amount for the pumpkins right now, which is a zuz for these pumpkins, and I want you to give me the pumpkins when they are each an amma long, when they become great pumpkins. So only at that time should you hand them over to me. Even though right now they're only little pumpkins, the little gourds, they're going to become big pumpkins later on, and the person is paying early on. So you might think, okay, because he's paying a low price of zuz, so the gardener is going to give him for the advance payment more than what the pumpkins are worth, because he's going to give him big pumpkins at the end. So you might think that that's agonata, that's a form of ribis, that the purchaser is giving a low price now to get big pumpkins later on that may be worth more at that time. Nonetheless, shari, etanu shari. If the pumpkins, these specific pumpkins, are in existence right now, so then it's considered like they're basically being transferred to the purchaser's possession, and therefore, when they go up in value, they're going up in value in the purchaser's possession. That would be okay. Leitanu asa. But if the pumpkins are not yet in this world, so then it would be asa. So we say pshita. That's sort of obvious. That would be meaning that Leitanu, that if he doesn't, the seller doesn't have any pumpkins that are big enough at this point in time, so then it would be usher. It's only if he has pumpkins that are big enough to be sold that we say it's okay, because that's the case of yeshlo. So the Gemara says, Pshita, that's the normal case of Yeshlo and Einlo that we're makel about, that if the seller has big pumpkins in his possession, so he could have given over those big pumpkins. So obviously that would be okay. So we say, no, I would have thought that even if he didn't have big pumpkins in his possession, that the pumpkins simply get bigger on their own. Even if the seller, the gardener, didn't have big pumpkins in his possession, he could just sell the small pumpkins as they are, for the reason that I said, that they're just going to get bigger on their own. And it's considered as if the deal has essentially been completed right now. Shapedami, Kamash Malan. So we say, no, that it's still not considered to be a good transaction unless the seller already has pumpkins that are as big as an amma. That's what we're going to start off saying. It's not necessarily we're going to end up saying. Kaman ki haitana. So this seems to be similar to the following law that's stated in the following brisa. The Tanya, aholik lachlav aziza. Somebody's going to milk his goats. Ligzos as v'chelav. He's going to shear his sheep. Lirdos as kabarto, and to scrape honey away from his beehive. Matzu chavero, his chave finds him. And this fellow who's going to milk his goats and so forth says, I'll make you a deal. Whatever it is that my goats are going, that whatever milk's going to come out of my goats, I'm selling to you for a certain price. Whatever's going to be shorn from my sheep is sold to you right now. Whatever it is that my beehive is going to give forth in terms of honey, it's all sold to you. Doesn't give a certain amount, meaning that whatever it's going to be, you give me a certain price. If it ends up being a good deal, because there'll be a lot of milk, a lot of shearings, a lot of honey, so you win out. If it ends up that it's not such a good yield, so you lose out. So therefore, there's risk and potential benefit. So that's considered to be mutter. It's not a special deal of agar nutter that the seller is giving over. The purchaser is incurring all the risk. However, if there is no risk because the seller guarantees a certain amount, even though maybe the seller is not going to produce that amount, so then he's just giving a premium because of the advance payment of funds, that would not be okay. But he says that if I'm going to sell you right now a gallon was worth of milk at a low price, whenever it is that my goats will get around to yield to producing a gallon's worth of milk, where I'm selling to you a certain 5 pounds worth of shearings, whenever it is that my sheep are going to produce that amount, I'm going to give you 3 liters worth of honey. Whenever it's going to be produced, there's a specified amount that's going to be given at a premium. That's going to be usher. And we see that's the case, even though obviously you have goats, so they're going to produce a certain amount of milk. You have beehives, they're going to produce an amount of honey. You have the sheep, they're going to produce a certain amount of shearings. We see because of the fact that at the time that the deal is being made, they haven't yet produced that amount of honey shearings and milk. Usher, that's the reason it's usher, and so too with respect to the pumpkins, if they're not big enough yet, and the seller does not have big pumpkins in his possessions. But that's only the first lashon. The second lashon of the Gemara, which is what we paskin like, is that there's a difference between the case of the production of milk shearings and honey and the case of the pumpkins. Ikadami amarava, and this is said in the name of Rava. Since it's Rava the second time around, that explains the Girsa that it was Rava the first time around. That because the pumpkins are simply going to become great on their own. If you just leave the pumpkins to their own devices, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to milk them or scrape them or shear them or anything. The pumpkins just sort of grow on their own. So it's considered as if, as we said, the small pumpkins were already handed over to the purchaser and they're growing sort of in his own territory. There isn't additional, what the poskim, later poskim point out, is that with the pumpkins, there isn't like an additional amount of work that the seller needs to do in order to make the small pumpkins big. It's just going to happen on its own. And it's a typical sort of deal that person will make, that they'll pay the money for the small pumpkins now in order to get the big pumpkins later. So that's not considered to be a ribis. But then we have a kasha from the case of the milk and the shearings and the honey, because we see that if you do stipulate a certain amount, that the purchaser is paying a low amount now in order to get a specified higher amount later, it is usher. Why shouldn't it be usher then in the case of the pumpkins, where the purchaser is buying them when they're only a half an amma big, and he's paying for them when they're going to be a specific size, namely an amma big, that's the gamida size that we mentioned earlier. So we say no, because in the case of the milk, and the shearings and the honey, it's not there yet. That's something that's produced over time. Because every single time that there are shearings, they are only a limited amount each time. And then they have to produce new shearings later on until you get to the amount that was stipulated upon. So the total amount that was stipulated upon, it's not all in existence at this point in time. The milk is not all in existence at this point in time. The shearings, the honey, they're not all in existence. But here, the pumpkin is there. This pumpkin has already been produced. If you would get rid of this pumpkin, there wouldn't be a different pumpkin that the purchaser is buying. The purchaser is buying specifically this pumpkin, which is already in existence, and it's just going to grow bigger on its own. Amar Abaye, Abaye said, Shari le inish, l'meimer le l'chavre, helach abba zuze achavisa de chamra. Abaye says the following chiddush. that it's a permissible for Ruvain to say Shimon here, to say to Shimon, you take $4 for this barrel of wine. Okay, for this barrel of wine, itakva b'shusech yakra izila b'shusi. And the purchaser says, if the barrel of wine turns out to be vinegar, it turns out to be vinegar. You know what that is? That's a mekaktos. That's a mekaktos. So therefore, that's considered to be your responsibility. I'm not paying $4 for vinegar. However, if it turns out that it really is wine, and it's going to go up in value between the time that you give me the wine, because he's not getting the wine right now, he's going to get it later on. So he says that if it goes up in value, so then I get the benefit. If it comes into, when you give it over, it's worth $8, so that'll be fine. And if it goes down in value, that it's going to end up being only worth $1, so I'll take that risk as well. So that's a valid yikra yizila b'shusi. So it says Abaye, that's perfectly permissible, because the only condition in which the purchaser is saying that the seller continues to incur responsibility is if it turns out that it's essentially a mekaktos. It turns out that it wasn't really good wine in the first place, because it was always vinegar. We just didn't know it. However, he's incurring the responsibility for any increase or loss in value, so that's a permissible transaction, even though the barrel is not being handed over right now. So Amalei Rashavia Abaye. So Rashavia said to Abaye, wait a second, but isn't this a case of high carb star that isn't this that normally we say that it's prohibited to bargain in such a way that I give you money to invest the money in a business transaction, and if the business goes bad, then you have to pay me back the exact amount that I gave you, and if the business goes well, and there's a profit, so then we're going to split the profits. So we say you're not allowed to do that, because while I'm going to get the benefit of any kind of a gain, I'm taking upon myself the burden of sharing in any kind of a loss. So therefore, that's kind of like, it looks like ribbis, even though there's no guarantee that I'm going to get a gain, but it's because of the fact that I'm not incurring the risk of a loss. So therefore, that's a problem of ribbis, at least midrabanan. So here the purchaser is not incurring the risk of the possible loss that this barrel is going to turn into vinegar before it's given over to him. So Amalei, no, we don't care about the fact that the barrel that the purchaser is not incurring that risk, since the purchaser isn't going to risk, assuming that it really is wine, it's going to go down in value. So he is undertaking that risk, given the Makabala and Lazula, the possibility of a reduction in value. So therefore, it is a possibility of gain and also a possibility of loss, and that would be sufficient for it not to be a ribbis problem. The next Mishnah, if I loan you money, I'm not allowed to live in your chutzir, in your courtyard, for free, because you're giving me a benefit, because you know that I have loaned you money, so it's like you're giving me a little bit of an extra premium. The poskim say that if, let's say, in the morning, you never used to say Shalom Aleichem to me in the morning, and now after I loan you money, you start saying Shalom Aleichem, that's also considered to be ribbis. So this is also a form of that. Here, you're giving me the right to live in your chutzir for free. And even if you're So if you're giving somebody a special deal because of the fact that you owe them money, so that's what the Mishnah says you're not allowed to do. Similarly, like this, let's say the person rents me their premises. Normally, they would rent out their apartment for $1,000, but they rent it to me for $500 because of the fact that they owe me money. So they give me a special deal that also is considered to be ribbis. Okay. So even though it's an arm's length transaction, I'm actually paying money to live in your apartment. You're renting it to me, and I'm not for free, but you're giving me a little bit of a break because of the fact that you owe me money. That's also ribbis. So I'm Rav Yosef, and even though if it wasn't stipulated, even if you didn't say I'm giving you a break because I owe you money, but the Maisa, you do owe me money, and it's not something which you would have done before, or Tosa says the mere fact that it's something like it's real estate and it's open and notorious, if it's a davarship or parhesia, so even if you would have done it for me in the past, because we're good friends, it still looks very suspicious. You still can't do it for me. So there are two circumstances which Tosa says that you can't do it, and we pass like both of them in Shulchan Aruch. One is either it's something which is very public and people don't know that we're good friends and you would have done me this favor anyway, but they know that I owe you money, that you owe me money and that you're doing me a favor in public, so that you shouldn't do. Or if it's something which you would not have done for me in the past, even if it's not Biparesia, but you're just doing me a special accommodation now, even if you're not saying it's because you owe me money, that also would be awesome. But if it's something which is not public and you would have done for me in the past, so then that would be mutter for you to do. So if you said hello to me in the morning before, you can continue to say hello to me in the morning now. It's not like a davar shebiparasia. So I'm of Yossi Bamin Yomi, I'm of Nachman, Apple Pisha, Amu, Adava Chasa Chavesh, Lumidaida, and a Sark Alos to Star. Even though we say that if under certain circumstances, if you live in a person's courtyard, which is not otherwise meant to be rented out, the person doesn't normally rent it out. So therefore, if I live in it, I don't have to pay you money, even though you didn't give me permission, but it's not a place that you normally rent out. So I don't have to give you money. But nonetheless, even though it doesn't have a monetary value in terms of requiring me to pay money for it, nonetheless, if it's in the context of after I had loaned you money, so then for sure I'm not allowed to do it. That if a person actually loaned money and then the lender is living in the chutzner that's not normally rented out of this individual, he does have to pay him schar, he does have to pay him rent. My kamash milan. So why do I need Rav Nachman to teach me that? That's what the Mishnah said. Tanina, the Mishnah that we just recited says exactly that. That if you are the lender of your fellow and the fellow has a courtyard, you're not allowed to live in his courtyard for free, and you can't even rent out from him and pay a price which is below the market price, because that counts as ribis. So he said, no, if it was just the case of the Mishnah, I would have thought that this halacha only applies to a courtyard which is normally rented out anyway. And a person who would normally pay rent, who doesn't have the option, the borrower in this case, it doesn't have the option of, or the lender in this case, I should say, doesn't have the option of living somewhere else for free. So wherever he's going to go, he's going to have to pay rent. So we say that he shouldn't get a sweet deal in this person's courtyard. But if I have, let's say, both conditions together, where the borrower is not somebody who normally charges rent for people to live in his space, and this lender is not somebody who really needs to rent out space because he has other options. If he wouldn't live here, so he can live other places for free. So I would have thought that in this case he doesn't have to pay money for living on the borrower's premises. Kamash Malan, that because it's in the context of a loan transaction where it kind of looks like the borrower is doing a favor to this lender based on the fact that the lender gave him some money, loaned him some money, that even if it's not normally a space that would be rented out, it would still be prohibited. Another lashon, and we're machmir like this lashon. This is the more chomer lashon, and this is the right. A number of poskim say you can't even say thank you. That it would actually be prohibited for the borrower to say thank you because that's sort of like a gratuitous add-on. My Rebbe Mordechai Willig says you can say thank you because thank you is not generally viewed as you're giving something to somebody. It's just viewed as like a derech eretz. It's proper etiquette. Whenever you talk to anybody, you say thank you. Like, you talk to somebody on the phone and like that you could be doing them a favor. You just conclude the conversation, say thank you. Well, thank you. With the thank you, you're doing them a favor. It's just the way people talk. That's just like a derech eretz kind of a way of interacting with another person. So he thinks it's okay, bisman azeh, the way that the term thank you is used. So Ika Diyami, Amar of Yosef Baminyomi, the other version of this is that Rav Yosef Baminyomi, Amar of Nachman said the following. That even though we say that if you live in a person's chutzner with that is not normally rented out, you don't have to pay the person money. Only in the case where it's expressly stipulated by the lender. The lender says, or the borrower says, and this is the explicit stipulated deal between the parties, the borrower says to the lender, loan me money, and guess what? In addition to paying you back the money, I'm also going to let you live in my kotzer. So when it's sort of like a kitsutza situation spelled out, that's when it's going to be usher for the lender to live for free. So Manda Amar, so according to the first version, where it wasn't even where the borrower stipulated that, just Habehu, the borrower borrowed money from the lender, and we say even in that case, the lender is not allowed to live in the borrower's courtyard for free. Kol shekain Haveni, certainly if that's the stipulation, that's the deal. That loan me money and I'll let you live in my courtyard for free. For sure, that would be also. Mandam, according to the second mandam, Haveni, they were talking about a situation where the borrower gave this as the deal. He's squeezing the deal. Loan me money and I'll let you live in my courtyard for free. But it's possible that if it wasn't expressly stipulated about Behu, it was just that the money was loaned by the lender to the borrower, and then afterwards the borrower happens to allow the lender to live in his courtyard for free loan, that would be okay if we're dealing with a type of courtyard that's not normally rented out by timer. Why would that be? Since it was not the original intention of the loan for the lender to live in the courtyard, bus, then it's just a normal situation, or somebody living in this courtyard of the borrower for free. Well, the whole world could do that without paying money, and that would be okay according to the second lashon. But we pass like the first lashon, which is more mach. Rav Yosef Bar Chama Takib Avdi the Inshi Damas Zuzi. Rav Yosef Bar Chama, he used to grab away the avadim, the slaves of people who owed him money. And then he would actually do work with those slaves. So that sounds like it was an extra ribis component, because in addition to collecting the amount of the loan, he would also grab their avadim. So Amalei Rava prayed. So Rava, the son of Yosef Chama, said, "How could you do such a thing, Daddy? My time of in Marachi." So Amalei Anak Rav Nachman Svirle. No, because I hold like Rav Nachman that there's no real benefit. I'm doing a favor to the slave owner because slaves aren't worth their keep, because the slaves are very lazy and not industrious, and that they cost more to feed them than the work in which they produce. So therefore, I don't view this as a benefit that's being conferred upon me. So I'm Rav Nachman, Avda Nom Krise Lo Shavi. Because Rav Nachman said that an Eved is not worth the amount of food that he eats in terms of the work that he does. So Amalei Emadam Rav Nachman, no, that may be true with respect to, this is what Rava, his son, said. That might only be true with respect to Rav Nachman, because he was talking about his Eved. His Eved was a lazy good for nothing. You go in Dari Avde, or maybe he was good for something, but not for earning his keep. The Marakid Bekubi, that he was the dance in the taverns in order to get paid, in order for people to feed him. That this is really all that he could do, is sort of dance and act like a clown. Of the Acharini Miyama, but he wasn't talking about other Avadim who might have been very hardworking and industrious. So Amalei, so the father of Yosef Bachama gave a different answer. He said, you know what? I hold like the following sheet of the Amar, who says that under normal circumstances, if you grab an Evan of your fellow and you do malacha with him, then you are pater, because you are not actually taking anything away from the other person that you should have to pay for it. Why? Because the slave owner is happy that the slave, if he's not otherwise doing work, shouldn't sit around and do nothing, because this way he will be trained and conditioned to always do work. So Amalei, so the son was not content with this, and he said that still doesn't wash, because Hanimili, that makes sense. When you're not otherwise a lender to borrower relationship with a person whose slave you have taken. However, Mar, but you, since you have loaned money to these individuals, since they owe you money, Maxi Caribis. It looks like ribis when you grab the slaves to do work with the slaves. The Amarav Yosef Aminyomi Amarav Nachman, Apapi, because this is basically our Mishnah. As of Yosef Aminyomi said, even though in an equivalent case, the person who lives in the courtyard of his fellow, and it's not a courtyard that's normally rented out, and he's not a person who normally would have to pay to live anywhere, he doesn't have to make payment. He's part of from having to pay him. But if it is in the context of a loan transaction, we would not allow this. Then he would have to pay. So Amalei, so the father finally gave in to his son, and he said, they taught you well in yeshiva. Hadri B, I therefore reverse myself, and I won't do this anymore. Stop. Okay.